when I made the horses, I don't know how many I made. I don't always get a photo of things. If I look, I will look back, and so I can see it. It wasn't a ton. I know of at least 3 green horses that I've sold that I have pictures of, and a couple blue ones, I think, a red one that I just sold on Etsy. And when I would make them, what I would do is I would paint enough to make whatever. I tend to do that, make a batch, and then I would finish however many I wanted for what I was doing. And you know, I didn't go to a show and sell 9 horses or anything like that. I was happy if I sold 1 horse and 1 big tree and some big purses, and then a whole bunch of potholders and little stuff. But so here's a green one that I painted in the past, and you know, I tend to come back and stitch and sometimes add more paint afterwards, and I sometimes would do the faces very different. If you look at the green horses that I have photos of, you can see how different they all are. And I just would paint each one, and so they were all different. And some of them that had really big heads and eyes at the top really looked like ponies to me. And I think this might even have been back during the My Little Pony phase at our house. But so, this is a blue one I never quilted. This is a blue one that I never finished all the way. So I would just start several, and I would get as far as I got, and then I would finish up the ones I wanted for the next show that I was going to, or for the farmer's market or whatever. And so this one you kind of get a preview of how we're going to do it, because we'll go through this stage, and I'm actually intending to make all of these and show you each part in detail. I'll film all of it, and then I'll go back and I'll find where I do the best version of something, and I might do some voiceover to explain it to you. I'll work on this one and try to finish it up, and you'll get to see some of that process as well as those other 2. I just wanted to show you, this was the very first one I ever made, and I knew immediately I was going to keep this one, and I never made a second one that looked like this. It's much more sort of rounded and less realistic in a way, but it was sort of the one that as soon as I made it, I said, this one's my keeper, and it was the first one. And I haven't gone back to that. And then there's this orange one who's only had 1 real fan. I really thought this woman was going to buy. I think of this one as sort of the Carmen Miranda of horses. And if you're my age, which I think about 75% of you are my age or older, you'll remember who Carmen Miranda was. But anyway, this horse has never found a home, and I've really stopped showing him because I do like him. I don't have a lot of my work hanging up around the house or in the sewing room, but if that changes, I would put him up because I like him. And for a wrinkle, as if things aren't complicated enough, I am going to also do a cow. I really have no reason to believe that I can do a cow, except for that I'm setting it as my own challenge. This is a picture taken by someone who lives near the family ranch and takes beautiful photos, and so we get a really nice calendar every year. And this one I'm going to use, I'm thinking right now that he's going to be gray and black with green highlights, and I'm thinking this snow could be gold or silver, and I love to spatter paint, and so I'll get to spatter paint on this one, and we'll just see what happens, because I'm going to make 1 new horse, that partially done horse, 2 painted horses that I've never touched before, and a new cow. So I'm going to work on 5 pieces, I believe. And I'm going to move forward, and I'm going to make these videos pretty short in this series. There will be 2 to 4 on the horse per month until the horses are done. And I'm also going to start a short series of sewing basics, and I'm going to try to do a weekly video on some little basic, and that, I think, as that goes, we'll see if that gets off the ground and becomes something. I'm also thinking of doing a occasional video on something I've been thinking of trying to make, where I just make one and show you what that was like, trying to discover, you know, what if I tried to make, a little coin purse where you use a worn out tape measure to make it snap open and shut. And I'm going to use paint that I have that is fabric paint, and as many of you know, my painting setup isn't that elaborate. The same 2 watermelon plates as sort of palettes for years, and the same margarine tub for water. I have these paints. I've ordered some fresh ones. A lot of them were getting dried out. I'm not going to use this. If I could get it in the picture. We're not going to use that. We're going to heat set, which is easier. And when we used this on the cork, we couldn't heat set the cork. And I didn't want to risk it getting wet and the paint dissolving, which the whole reason you heat set is to avoid that. So I don't have a lot of fancy brushes. I'm just using ones that, some of them came from the art supply store, some of them are from the hardware store. You can see that I've trimmed this one, and I use these to get some paint out, but you can also use a little piece of card. This is pretty thick. It's from like a box, a little box. That's to get paint out. Sometimes I'll use plastic utensils that are laying around. And then I just have this motley assortment of, you know, brushes that I'll just try to use. I like it when I have a nice detail brush for certain things, but not so much with painting the horses. So I do like this brand, the Lumiere, which is by Jacquard, I believe it's pronounced. I like the colors. This is practically empty. I like the solid. I tend to use a lot of white. I don't use a lot of extender. I tend to extend with water, and that's why I wash the pieces after I heat set them to make sure it's still there, because the extender will make sure that happens. But I just paint like a watercolor painter, I guess, or like a bad watercolor painter. But so I like these metallics, and I always mix them in, and this is a real nice blue. And when I paint, you'll see that what I like to do is I like to put out a piece of freezer paper with the shiny side up. Will protect your surface fairly well if you're careful. It certainly will protect a counter unless you're really flooding your paint, in which case it may not heat set properly. So I wouldn't be flooding. When possible, I don't actually put a backing on until it's painted and heat set, unless I forget and make the whole sandwich, because the paint can bleed through. And then there's paint on the back, which is okay. It goes along that idea of it being one-sided like a painting, but you don't normally expect an art quilt to have paint that's bled through to the back, so I do sort of try to avoid it. This is what I tend to paint on. This is fabric that I got at one of the chains. It's got a light, nice modeling on a sort of a dark cream background, and then it's got all this darker kind of tan modeling, and then it's got a real nice metallic fleck that, you know, doesn't come off very easily. And to some extent, depending on what you do, that fleck is going to stay there, but this has very little actual color painted onto it. This horse is mostly sort of a blonde horse. And so you see a lot of it. This guy, I don't know if you can tell, but he's completely painted, and there is metallic paint, but you can still see that gold shimmer in there. If I move this, maybe you can see where it's picking up that gold fleck. Okay, so can you see all that sparkle in there? He's got pretty full coverage of paint, and I think you can still see the sparkle along with the metallic in the green. So I think you could use, if you were going to do 100% coverage, I think you could find a sparkly fabric that was almost any color and then just make it work over top. The one thing I would say though is I don't mean a certain type of metallic. I'm going to show you the one I don't mean. Okay, this type of metallic that has it's not very glittery like. The one I showed you before has kind of a glitter, but it's so embedded you can't just flick it off. If you can flick off what's on the fabric, it's not going to work that well for you. This is more of just a paint that's gold. I don't think this would show through much because it doesn't have that actual sparkle that catches the light. And so that's not what I would use. But anything from your stash that has this kind of gold in it, and you can of course use a solid or a print. You could print over some ugly tulip fabric that you never liked. This one, I don't know how well this would work because it's pretty sparkly and I don't think it scratches off. I've used this a lot and maybe I can get a little bit off. But anyway, you know, if you were going to make a gecko or some kind of a Gila monster or a lizard or something, maybe this would, or a crocodile, maybe this would come through in a really cool way. And, you know, for a crocodile, you know, you might want to orient it this way. This is, I think, it looks a lot like kind of a weird corn on the cob. But anyway, very, very sparkly. One of the last things that I want to talk about today is appropriate inspiration pictures for your artwork, which mainly has to do with head position. Kim's cow is essentially a front portrait, and some of the horses that I struggled with the most when I was making them were 3/4 positions, which is the hardest. It's hard with humans, it's hard with horses. I don't know if it's hard with a chicken or an iguana. Only one of my horses was almost a profile portrait. Most of them were 3/4, but a few of them I had a real hard time with because of all the different considerations for position and proportion and shading and doing that in fabric for the first time. So I learned a tremendous amount making the horse quilts, but there was a lot going on and a lot to try to figure out. I recommend for your picture that you use a front or profile picture unless you've always been able to draw humans and horses in 3/4 and understand all the planes and proportions and are real comfortable with that. And I caution against a head position that's too dynamic, and by that I mean the head shouldn't be tilted up or down very much for this first quilted portrait of a horse or other animal. I would love it if people would start looking around for photos, and I did want to just caution you about respecting the copyright of others. I asked Kim's permission to use her photo, and I would have done that even just to make a quilt to sell. Anyway, please start thinking about this project, and thank you for watching this far, and stay safe out there. And I will make videos as long as I can, and it may just be that there's a bunch this spring and then there aren't any, but maybe I can start up again in the fall. Maybe I'll make them all the way through. Maybe I'll make videos all through the summer if it seems like the thing to do. And so Thanks for watching.